December 1941. Hawaii. The Pacific Fleet rested in Pearl Harbor like a sleeping giant that had grown too comfortable with peace. 8 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers. Hundreds of aircraft lined up wing to wing on airfields, arranged not for quick scramble, but for easy counting during inspections. The war everyone talked about felt distant. Europe burned, but Europe always seemed to burn. China bled under Japanese occupation, but China was an ocean away. Here, in the warm Hawaiian sun, sailors wrote letters home about luau's and surf. Officers played golf on Saturday afternoons. The Pacific was America's ocean, and everyone knew it. But not everyone. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton had stopped sleeping well in November. As the Pacific Fleet's intelligence officer, he spent his days translating intercepted Japanese communications, tracking ship movements, analyzing diplomatic cables that grew colder each week. He had learned Japanese at the Naval Academy, spent years studying their military doctrine, their culture, their way of thinking. And what he saw terrified him. By late November, Japanese carriers had gone silent. Not reduced communications, silent. Complete radio blackout. For a Navy that coordinated everything through wireless, this wasn't routine maintenance. This was operational security for something big. Layton brought his concerns to Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet, 3 times in 2 weeks. Where are their carriers? Layton would ask, spreading maps across Kimmel's desk, pointing to the empty spaces where Japanese task forces should be. Kimmel would lean back, fingers drumming on mahogany. Could be anywhere, Commander. Training exercises in home waters, most likely. Or they could be moving into position. For what? An attack on the Philippines? Singapore? Those are British and American territories thousands of miles from here. Or here, sir. The room would go quiet then. Kimmel would look at Layton with something between respect and exhaustion. They'd had this conversation before. Edwin, I've got 8 battleships sitting in that harbor. The Japanese know that. They're not stupid enough to sail halfway across the Pacific to pick a fight they can't win. Washington says negotiations are still ongoing. We'll get warning if things go south. Layton would nod. Salute. Leave. And return to his office to stare at maps that showed nothing but absence. The Pacific Fleet operated on a schedule everyone knew. Monday through Friday, training exercises, maintenance, drills. Weekends, liberty. Shore leave. Rest. By Saturday, December 6th, Pearl Harbor had settled into its weekly rhythm. The battleships, Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, Pennsylvania, were moored in neat rows along Battleship Row. Most crews had weekend passes. The Officers' Club was planning a dance. Ensign Joseph Taussig Jr., aboard the USS Nevada, had duty that weekend. He didn't mind. At 23, he was young enough to still find purpose in routine. He walked the deck that Saturday evening, checking gun crews, inspecting equipment, watching the sun set over the harbor. Everything was in order. Everything was always in order. Across the harbor, on Ford Island, Private James Mann of the Army Air Corps was playing cards with 3 other enlisted men in the barracks. They'd been stationed in Hawaii for 6 months, and the assignment felt like winning a lottery. Warm weather. Beautiful beaches. No combat. Think we'll ever see action? One of them asked, shuffling the deck. Mann shrugged. Hope not. I joined to see the world, not get shot at. They laughed. Dealt another hand. Outside, the night was clear. Stars reflected off calm water. The harbor glowed with the soft lights of ships at anchor. No one noticed the submarine periscope that broke the surface 2 miles offshore, observed for 7 minutes, then disappeared. No one heard the radio transmission sent in code to a task force 230 miles north, Fleet and Harbor. Proceeding as planned. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. 6 a.m. The first light touched the mountains behind Pearl Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was the kind of morning that made men believe the world was at peace. Ensign Taussig woke early aboard the Nevada. He shaved, dressed, checked the duty roster. By 7:30 a.m., he was on deck, preparing for the morning flag-raising ceremony scheduled for 8 a.m. Private Mann slept in. No drills on Sunday. He'd planned to hit the beach later, maybe catch a movie in Honolulu. Lieutenant Commander Layton was already at his desk in the intelligence office, reviewing overnight dispatches. Nothing new. The Japanese carriers were still missing. Negotiations in Washington had stalled. The Japanese ambassador was scheduled to deliver a message to the State Department at 1 p.m. Washington time, 7:30 a.m. Hawaii time. He noted the timing. Odd. Why Sunday morning? At 7:02 a.m., 2 Army privates operating a mobile radar station at Opana Point, on the northern tip of Oahu, saw something strange on their screen. A large formation of aircraft, 137 miles north, heading south toward the island. Private Joseph Lockard, the more experienced operator, stared at the blip. It was big. Really big. More planes than he'd ever seen on the scope. His partner, Private George Elliott, wanted to report it immediately. Lockard hesitated. The radar station was supposed to shut down at 7 a.m. They were only still operating because they were waiting for the truck to pick them up. Besides, a flight of B-17 bombers was expected from California that morning. This was probably them. Should we call it in? Elliott asked. Lockard looked at the scope again. The formation was now 92 miles out. Yeah. Call it in. Just to be sure. Elliott phoned the information center at Fort Shafter. A lone officer, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, was on duty. Tyler listened to the report, thought for a moment, then gave his assessment. Don't worry about it. The B-17s were expected. This had to be them. Elliott hung up. The 2 privates watched the blip move closer. 50 miles. 40 miles. 30 miles. At 7:55 a.m., the formation split into 2 groups. At 7:58 a.m., the first wave, 183 Japanese aircraft, reached the coast of Oahu. Ensign Taussig stood at attention on the deck of the USS Nevada as the color guard prepared to raise the flag. The ship's band assembled, instruments ready for the national anthem. 8 a.m. The flag began to rise. The band played the first notes of the Star-Spangled Banner. And then the sky opened. Taussig heard them before he saw them, a sound like distant thunder that grew louder, closer, impossible to ignore. He looked up. Aircraft. Dozens of them. Diving out of the sun. For one frozen second, he thought it was a drill. Some kind of surprise exercise. The planes were too low, too fast, but maybe. Then he saw the red circles on the wings. The first bomb hit the water between the Nevada and the Arizona, sending up a geyser of white foam. The second hit the Arizona's deck. The explosion was so loud it felt like the world had cracked open. Taussig didn't think. Training took over. He ran to his battle station, shouting orders, his voice lost in the chaos of alarms, explosions, screaming metal. The band stopped playing mid-note. The flag continued to rise. Across the harbor, Private Mann woke to the sound of explosions. He thought it was construction. Blasting. Then the barracks shook, and someone yelled, "We're under attack." He pulled on his pants, no shirt, no shoes, and ran outside. The sky was full of planes. Black smoke poured from Battleship Row. The Arizona was on fire. No, the Arizona was fire, a column of flame and smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air. Mann stood there, barefoot on the tarmac, watching his world end. A Zero fighter roared overhead, so low he could see the pilot's face. The pilot looked down at him. Their eyes met for half a second. Then the plane was gone, strafing a row of parked aircraft, and Mann was running, toward what, he didn't know. Toward something. Anything. In the intelligence office, Lieutenant Commander Layton heard the first explosions and knew immediately what they meant. He didn't run to the window. He didn't need to see it to know. He sat at his desk, hands flat on the surface, and closed his eyes. He had been right. And being right changed nothing. The Japanese carriers he'd been tracking, or failing to track, had sailed 3,500 miles across the Pacific, maintained radio silence, avoided detection, and launched a strike force that was, at this very moment, destroying the Pacific Fleet. Everything he'd warned about. Everything he'd feared. It was happening. The phone on his desk rang. He picked it up. "Layton, what the hell is going on?" Admiral Kimmel's voice, tight with controlled panic. "We're under attack, sir. Japanese carrier aircraft." A pause. Then, "How many carriers?" "I don't know, sir. At least 4. Possibly 6. Another pause. "Longer. How did we miss this?" Layton looked at the maps on his wall, the charts, the intelligence reports, the gaps where information should have been. "We didn't miss it, sir. We just didn't believe it." The attack lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes. 2 waves. 353 aircraft. 2,403 Americans killed. 1,178 wounded. 4 battleships sunk. 4 damaged. 3 cruisers hit. 3 destroyers destroyed. 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. By 10 a.m., it was over. The Japanese task force turned north and disappeared into the Pacific, leaving behind a harbor choked with smoke, oil, and bodies. Ensign Tausig survived. The Nevada, despite taking multiple hits, was the only battleship to get underway during the attack. He would spend the rest of the war hunting the men who had attacked his ship. Private Mann survived. He would transfer to a combat unit and fight his way across the Pacific, island by island, until he reached Japan itself. Lieutenant Commander Layton survived. He would become one of the most important intelligence officers in the Pacific War, helping to plan the victories that would eventually break Japan's empire. But on December 7, 1941, as the sun set over Pearl Harbor and the fires still burned, none of them knew what came next. They only knew that the world had changed. And there was no going back. December 7, 1941. 10:15 a.m. The last Japanese aircraft disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a harbor that looked like the end of the world. Black smoke rose from battleship row in columns so thick they blocked out the sun. The water burned, oil from ruptured fuel tanks had spread across the surface and ignited, turning Pearl Harbor into a lake of fire. Men floated in that burning water, screaming for help that came too slowly or not at all. The USS Arizona was gone. Not sunk, gone. A magazine explosion had torn the ship apart in seconds, killing 1,177 men. What remained was a twisted metal grave, still burning, still too hot to approach. The Oklahoma had capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors inside her hull. Rescue crews could hear them, fists pounding on steel, voices calling out from the darkness. But the ship was upside down, and time was running out. This was not the clean, heroic war Americans had imagined. This was chaos. Blood. Fire. Bodies. And in the midst of it all, 3 men faced the same question. What do we do now? Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton stood in Admiral Kimmel's office, watching his commander stare out the window at the burning harbor. Neither man had spoken for 3 minutes. Finally, Kimmel turned. His face was gray, aged 10 years and 2 hours. "They're going to crucify us for this, Edwin." Layton said nothing. There was nothing to say. Washington will want answers. How did 6 Japanese carriers cross the Pacific without us knowing? How did we get caught with our pants down? Kimmel's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "They'll ask why we didn't see it coming." "We did see it coming, sir." Layton's voice was quiet but firm. "We warned them. Multiple times. Warnings aren't enough. Kimmel walked to his desk, picked up a folder, intelligence reports from the past month. He dropped it back down. We needed proof. We needed certainty. And we didn't have it. Leighton thought about the missing carriers. The intercepted messages. The diplomatic cables that had grown colder each day. All the pieces had been there, scattered across his desk like a puzzle no one had time to assemble. Sir, with respect, we had enough. We just didn't act on it. Kimmel looked at him sharply. Careful, Commander. I'm not blaming you, sir. I'm blaming the system. We collected intelligence, but we didn't believe it. We saw what we wanted to see, a Japan that was rational, cautious, afraid of American power. We didn't see what they actually were, desperate, cornered, willing to gamble everything. Kimmel sat down heavily. So what do we do now? Leighton looked out at the harbor. Rescue boats moved between burning ships. Sailors pulled bodies from the water. The Pacific Fleet, the force that was supposed to protect the entire ocean, was crippled. But not destroyed. We rebuild, sir. And we make sure this never happens again. Kimmel nodded slowly. You're staying on as intelligence officer. I'll need you for what comes next. What comes next, sir? Kimmel's eyes hardened. We find those carriers. And we sink every last one of them. Ensign Joseph Taussig Jr. hadn't left the USS Nevada since the attack ended. His ship was beached at Hospital Point, deliberately run aground to prevent her from sinking in the channel and blocking the harbor entrance. She'd taken 6 bomb hits and 1 torpedo, but she was still afloat. Still fighting. Taussig moved through the damaged sections, checking on his men, coordinating damage control, refusing to rest even though his hands were burned and his uniform was soaked with oil and blood, some his, most not. A chief petty officer found him in the forward magazine, inspecting ammunition stores. Sir, you need to see the dock. Those burns. Later. Taussig didn't look up. How much ammunition do we have left? Enough, sir. But we're not going anywhere for a while. Ship's not seaworthy. Then we fix her. The chief hesitated. Sir, with respect, half the Pacific Fleet is on the bottom of the harbor. The Nevada's beat to hell. Maybe we should. Taussig turned, and the chief stopped talking. The ensign's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but burning with something the chief recognized, purpose. Chief, those bastards came into our harbor. They attacked our ships. They killed our men. Taussig's voice was low, controlled. And they think they've won. They think we're finished. He looked out through a blown-out porthole at the burning Arizona, at the capsized Oklahoma, at the oil-slicked water filled with debris and bodies. We're going to prove them wrong. We're going to fix this ship, and we're going to sail her back out into that ocean, and we're going to make them regret they ever heard the name USS Nevada. The chief nodded slowly. Aye, sir. I'll get the repair crews started. Taussig turned back to the ammunition inventory. His hands shook, from exhaustion, from adrenaline, from something deeper he couldn't name. Rage. Cold, focused rage. The kind that doesn't burn out. The kind that lasts years. Private James Mann spent the afternoon pulling bodies out of the water. He'd volunteered for rescue duty because he couldn't stand doing nothing. The barracks were chaos, men running everywhere, officers shouting contradictory orders, rumors spreading that the Japanese were landing troops, that more attacks were coming, that California was being bombed. So Mann grabbed a boat and rowed out into the harbor with 3 other enlisted men. What they found there would stay with him for the rest of his life. Bodies floated everywhere. Some were burned beyond recognition. Some were intact, peaceful, like they'd just fallen asleep in the water. Some were trapped in wreckage, pinned under twisted metal, and Mann had to decide whether to try to free them or move on to someone who might still be alive. He made that decision 17 times that afternoon. 17 times he chose to leave a dead man behind to search for a living one. By the time the sun started to set, they'd pulled 43 men from the water. 19 were alive. 24 were not. Man sat in the boat, hands blistered from rowing, uniform stiff with dried salt and blood, and stared at the harbor. This morning, he'd been a kid playing cards, hoping he'd never see combat. Now he was a man who'd held dying sailors in his arms, who'd heard them call for their mothers, who'd watched the light go out of their eyes. One of the other men in the boat, a corporal named Davis, spoke quietly. "You okay, man?" Man didn't answer for a long time. "I saw him," he finally said. "Saw who?" "The pilot. This morning. When they came in low. I saw his face." Davis nodded. "Yeah. Me too. He looked normal. Like a regular guy. Not a monster. Just a man doing his job. Does that make it better or worse?" Man thought about it. "Worse. Because it means they're not evil. They're just like us. And we're going to have to kill them anyway." Davis didn't respond. There was nothing to say. They rowed back to shore in silence, leaving behind a harbor that would never be the same. December 7th, 1941. 11:47 p.m. Pearl Harbor was dark. Blackout conditions, no lights, no fires that could be extinguished, nothing to guide another attack if it came. But the fires on the Arizona still burned. You couldn't put them out. The ship was too hot, the oil too thick. So she burned through the night, a funeral pyre for 1,177 men, visible for miles. Lieutenant Commander Layton sat in his office, surrounded by maps and reports, trying to piece together what had happened. How many carriers? Where did they come from? Where were they now? The intelligence was fragmentary, contradictory. Some reports said 4 carriers. Some said 6. Some said 8. Radio intercepts suggested the task force had turned north after the attack, but that was hours old. They could be anywhere by now. He worked through the night, because sleeping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that he'd seen this coming and hadn't been able to stop it. Around 2 a.m., a young ensign brought him a decoded message from Washington. Layton read it twice. President Roosevelt would address Congress tomorrow. He would ask for a declaration of war. America was going to war. Not the war they'd imagined, the clean, distant war in Europe that they could support from afar. A real war. A Pacific War. Against an enemy that had just proven it could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. Layton set the message down and looked at the map of the Pacific on his wall. It was a big ocean. And somewhere out there, the Japanese carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor were sailing home, celebrating their victory. But they'd made a mistake. They'd attacked the ships. The planes. The base. But they'd missed the repair facilities. The fuel depots. The submarine pens. And most importantly, they'd missed the carriers. The USS Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga had been at sea during the attack. They were still out there. Still operational. The Pacific Fleet was hurt. But it wasn't dead. Layton allowed himself a thin smile. You should have finished the job, he thought. Because now we're coming for you. Across the harbor, Ensign Tausig finally collapsed in his bunk aboard the Nevada, too exhausted to stay awake any longer. He dreamed of fire. Of explosions. Of the moment the first bomb hit and the world changed. He woke 3 hours later, drenched in sweat, and went back to work. On Ford Island, Private Man lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He kept seeing the pilot's face. The man who'd looked down at him from the Zero fighter. The man who was just doing his job. Man wondered if that pilot had made it home. If he was celebrating. If he felt proud of what he'd done. Man wondered if he'd ever get the chance to meet him again. Not as strangers on opposite sides of a war, but as enemies who understood each other. He hoped he would. Because next time, he'd be ready. December 8th, 1941. 12:30 p.m. Washington time. 7 a.m. Hawaii time. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. His voice, broadcast over radio, reached every corner of America and Pearl Harbor. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. In his office, Leighton listened. Aboard the Nevada, Taussig listened. On Ford Island, Mann listened. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. The vote was nearly unanimous. 388 to 1 in the House. 82 to 0 in the Senate. America was at war. And in Pearl Harbor, 3 men, an intelligence officer who'd seen it coming, an ensign who'd refused to quit, and a private who'd found his purpose, understood what that meant. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of the longest, bloodiest war the Pacific had ever seen. The beginning of a reckoning that would take 4 years and cost millions of lives. The beginning of the end for the empire that thought it could strike without consequence. Leighton returned to his maps. Taussig returned to his ship. Mann returned to his duty. And the war began. June 1942. The Pacific Ocean. The war that began at Pearl Harbor had spread across the Pacific like wildfire. The Philippines fell. Guam fell. Wake Island fell. Singapore, the impregnable British fortress, fell in the worst defeat in British military history. Hong Kong, Burma, the Dutch East Indies, all fell to the Japanese advance. By spring 1942, the Empire of Japan controlled an area larger than the continental United States, stretching from the borders of India to the Central Pacific. Their navy ruled the ocean. Their army seemed unstoppable. America was losing. But something had changed. The shock of Pearl Harbor had transformed into something harder, colder. The nation that had been attacked while sleeping was now wide awake. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Shipyards launched new vessels every week. Young men lined up at recruitment centers by the thousands. And in the Pacific, 3 men who had survived December 7th were about to face the moment that would determine whether Pearl Harbor had been a death blow or a wake-up call. June 3, 1942. Pearl Harbor. 0300 hours. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Leighton hadn't slept in 36 hours. He stood in the intelligence center, surrounded by junior officers, staring at a map of the Pacific covered in pins, strings, and handwritten notes. Radio intercepts. Decoded messages. Traffic analysis. Pattern recognition. For weeks, they'd been tracking increased Japanese naval communications. Something big was coming. Another attack. But where? Some analysts said the Aleutians, Alaska's island chain. Others said Midway, the tiny atoll 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. A few thought it was a feint, that the real target was Pearl Harbor again, or even the West Coast. Leighton had spent 6 months rebuilding the intelligence network that had failed to predict Pearl Harbor. He'd recruited more translators, improved decryption methods, established better communication with Washington. He'd learned from his mistakes. And now, staring at the intercepts, he saw something others didn't. A pattern. The Japanese kept referring to a target designated AF. They were gathering their entire carrier fleet, possibly 6 carriers, the same force that had attacked Pearl Harbor, for a decisive battle. But what was AF? Leighton had a theory. A dangerous theory. One that would require committing America's remaining carriers, only 3, to a battle where they'd be outnumbered 2 to 1. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had replaced Kimmel as Pacific Fleet Commander, entered the room. "Talk to me, Edwin." Leighton pointed to the map. "AF is Midway, sir." "I'm certain of it." "Certain? Or guessing?" Leighton met his commander's eyes. 6 months ago, I was certain Pearl Harbor was at risk. I was right, but I couldn't prove it. This time, I can prove it. How? We send a message. Have Midway broadcast in the clear that their water distillation plant is broken. If the Japanese intercept it and report that AF is short on fresh water, we'll know. Nimitz considered this. And if you're wrong? If AF isn't Midway? If we send our carriers to the wrong place and the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor again? Leighton thought about December 7th. The burning ships. The bodies in the water. The weight of being right but powerless. Then I'll have failed twice, sir. And I'll resign my commission. Nimitz studied him for a long moment. Send the message. 2 days later, Japanese intelligence reported that AF is short on fresh water. Leighton had been right. The Japanese were coming to Midway. And this time, America would be waiting. June 4, 1942. USS Enterprise. 0600 hours. Ensign Joseph Taussig Jr. stood on the flight deck of the USS Enterprise, watching dive bombers prepare for launch. He was no longer aboard the Nevada. After Pearl Harbor, he'd requested transfer to a carrier. He wanted to take the fight to the enemy, not wait for them to come to him. The Navy had promoted him to full lieutenant and assigned him to Enterprise as an anti-aircraft gunnery officer. Now, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, he was about to face the Japanese carriers that had attacked his ship. The intelligence was solid, for Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, were approaching Midway. The same carriers that had launched the Pearl Harbor attack. The same pilots who had killed his friends. Enterprise, along with Yorktown and Hornet, had positioned themselves northeast of Midway, hidden by cloud cover, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Taussig checked his gun crews. 37 men under his command, manning 5-inch anti-aircraft batteries. Their job, protect the ship from Japanese bombers while American planes attacked the enemy carriers. A young sailor, couldn't have been more than 19, approached nervously. "Sir, is it true that we're outnumbered?" Taussig looked at him. 6 months ago, he would have offered reassurance. Told him everything would be fine. But Pearl Harbor had burned that innocence out of him. Yes. They have more carriers. More planes. More experience. They've been winning this war for 6 months. The sailor's face paled. Taussig continued, his voice steady. But we have something they don't. We have surprise. They think we're still licking our wounds from Pearl Harbor. They think we're afraid. He looked out at the horizon, where somewhere beyond the clouds, the Japanese fleet was sailing toward what they thought would be another easy victory. They're wrong. And today, we're going to prove it. The sailor nodded, jaw set. At 0702 hours, the first American scout plane radioed back, enemy carriers sighted. At 0706 hours, Enterprise began launching aircraft. Taussig watched them go, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, fighters, climbing into the morning sky, heading toward a battle that would determine the course of the war. He returned to his gun station and waited. The Japanese would come. And when they did, he'd be ready. June 4, 1942. Midway Atoll. 0630 hours. Private James Mann crouched in a foxhole on Eastern Island, part of Midway Atoll, gripping his rifle and watching the sky. He wasn't supposed to be here. After Pearl Harbor, he'd been assigned to base security in Hawaii. But he'd volunteered for every combat posting that came up, and eventually, the Army had sent him to Midway, a tiny speck of coral in the middle of nowhere, home to 3,000 Marines and a handful of Army personnel. For 3 days, they'd been on high alert. Intelligence said the Japanese were coming. A massive fleet. Carriers. Battleships. Troop transports for an invasion. Mann had spent those 3 days digging his foxhole deeper, checking his ammunition, and thinking about December 7th. About the bodies in the water. About the pilot who'd looked down at him. About the choice he'd made that day, to stop being a kid who hoped he'd never see combat and become a man who was ready for it. At 0630 hours, the air raid sirens screamed. Mann looked up and saw them, dozens of Japanese aircraft, approaching from the northwest. Bombers. Fighters. The same planes that had attacked Pearl Harbor. "Here they come," someone shouted. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with black puffs of flak. American fighters, obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and a handful of newer Wildcats, rose to meet the attackers. The Japanese bombers came in low and fast. Man pressed himself into his foxhole as the first bombs hit. The ground shook. Dirt and coral rained down. A fuel depot exploded, sending a fireball into the sky. He'd been in combat for 30 seconds, and it was already worse than Pearl Harbor. At Pearl Harbor, he'd been a bystander. A witness. Here, he was a target. A Japanese Zero strafed his position, bullets chewing up the ground 3 feet from his foxhole. Man raised his rifle and fired, once, twice, 3 times, knowing it was useless, knowing a rifle couldn't bring down a fighter plane, but firing anyway because doing nothing was worse. The attack lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, Man climbed out of his foxhole and looked around. The airfield was cratered. Buildings were burning. Bodies, American bodies, lay scattered across the tarmac. But the island was still there. Still fighting. A Marine sergeant ran past, shouting orders. "Get to your stations. They'll be back. This isn't over." Man reloaded his rifle and took his position. The sergeant was right. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. June 4th, 1942. 1020 hours. 200 miles northwest of Midway. Lieutenant Commander Layton wasn't at the battle. He was back at Pearl Harbor, in the intelligence center, receiving radio reports as they came in. The news was bad. American torpedo bombers had attacked the Japanese carriers at 0930 hours. Of 41 planes, 35 had been shot down. No hits. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol had slaughtered them. At 1000 hours, more American bombers attacked. Again, heavy losses. Again, no hits. The Japanese carriers remained untouched, launching their own strike against the American fleet. Layton stared at the map, feeling the weight of his certainty. He'd been right about Midway. He'd positioned the American carriers perfectly. But if they couldn't hit the Japanese ships, none of it mattered. At 1022 hours, a new report came in. Layton read it once. Twice. Then looked up at the room full of officers. Dive bombers from Enterprise in Yorktown have hit 3 Japanese carriers. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu are on fire. The room went silent. "Say again," someone asked. 3 carriers. On fire. Confirmed. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then the room erupted in cheers. Aboard the Enterprise, Lieutenant Tausig heard the news over the ship's loudspeaker and felt something he hadn't felt since December 7th, hope. 3 carriers. The heart of the Japanese fleet. The same ships that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Burning. But there was still one left, Hiryu. And at 1200 hours, Japanese bombers from Hiryu found the Yorktown. Tausig's gun crews opened fire, filling the sky with tracers. He shouted orders, coordinated fire patterns, watched as Japanese planes fell from the sky. But some got through. Yorktown took 3 bomb hits. She slowed, listing, but stayed afloat. At 1430 hours, Hiryu launched a second strike. Torpedo bombers. Tausig's crews fired until their barrels glowed red. They shot down 4 planes. 5. 6. But 2 torpedoes hit Yorktown. The carrier began to sink. On Midway, Private Man watched American dive bombers return from the battle, many trailing smoke, some crash landing on the damaged airfield. Pilots climbed out of their cockpits, exhausted, some wounded, and reported what they'd seen. "We got them. 3 carriers burning. Maybe 4. Man didn't cheer. He'd learned that lesson at Pearl Harbor. Victory wasn't about one battle. It was about the long road ahead. But for the first time since December 7th, that road didn't look quite so dark. June 7th, 1942. Pearl Harbor. The battle was over. For Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, sunk. The entire strike force that had attacked Pearl Harbor, destroyed in 5 minutes of American dive bombing. One American carrier, Yorktown, sunk. 307 Americans killed. But the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. Lieutenant Commander Layton stood in Admiral Nimitz's office, exhausted but vindicated. "You were right, Edwin," Nimitz said quietly. "About Pearl Harbor. About Midway. You saw what was coming both times. I was 6 months too late the first time, sir. But 6 months early the second time. That's what matters now." Layton looked out at Pearl Harbor. The Arizona was still there, still submerged, still a grave for 1,177 men. But around her, the harbor was alive again. Ships being repaired. New vessels arriving. The Pacific Fleet, rebuilding. "What happens now, sir?" Nimitz smiled grimly. Now we go on the offensive. We take back every island they took from us. And we don't stop until we reach Tokyo." Lieutenant Joseph Taussig Jr. received orders to return to the Nevada, which had been repaired and was ready for combat operations. He'd helped sink the carriers that attacked his ship. But the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Private James Mann was promoted to corporal and reassigned to a Marine Raider battalion preparing for offensive operations. He'd survived Pearl Harbor. He'd survived Midway. Now he'd learn what it meant to take the fight to the enemy. December 7th, 1945. Pearl Harbor. For years after the attack, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, now Captain Layton, stood at the memorial site where the USS Arizona rested beneath the water. The war was over. Japan had surrendered 3 months earlier. The carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor were all sunk. The pilots who flew that mission were dead or captured. The empire that thought it could strike without consequence had been destroyed. But the cost had been staggering. Millions dead. Cities burned. 2 atomic bombs dropped. And here, beneath the water, 1,177 men still rested in the Arizona, forever young, forever at their posts. Layton had spent 4 years hunting the enemy across the Pacific. He'd helped plan the victories at Midway, Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf. He'd watched the Japanese fleet, once the most powerful navy in the world, reduced to nothing. He'd been right about everything. But being right didn't bring back the dead. Captain Joseph Taussig Jr. stood beside him, no longer an ensign, no longer young. He'd fought in every major naval battle of the Pacific War. He'd earned a Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and a reputation as one of the finest gunnery officers in the fleet. The Nevada, his ship, had bombarded the beaches at Normandy, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. She'd survived Pearl Harbor and lived to see Tokyo Bay. But 1,177 men aboard the Arizona hadn't. Sergeant James Mann stood with them, no longer a private, no longer innocent. He'd fought on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. He'd seen more death than any man should see in 10 lifetimes. He'd never found the pilot whose face he'd seen on December 7th. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he'd survived. It didn't matter anymore. The war was over. The 3 men stood in silence, watching the oil that still leaked from the Arizona, rising to the surface in rainbow patterns, the ship's blood, still flowing after 4 years. Finally, Layton spoke. "Was it worth it?" Taussig didn't answer immediately. "We won. That has to count for something. But at what cost?" Mann looked at the memorial, at the names of the dead carved in stone. The cost was everything. But if we hadn't fought, we'd have lost everything anyway. Layton nodded slowly. December 7th changed us. All of us. The whole country. We stopped being the nation that thought we were safe because we had 2 oceans protecting us. we learn that nowhere is safe. That peace is fragile. That vigilance is the price of survival. And that intelligence matters, Tausig added quietly. If we'd listened to you before Pearl Harbor. We can't change the past, Leighton interrupted. We can only learn from it. They stood together, three men who'd survived the day that changed everything, looking at the grave of those who hadn't. The war was over. But Pearl Harbor would never be over. Not for them. Not for America. The oil continued to rise from the Arizona, as it would for decades to come, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal, some debts can never be repaid, and some moments change the world forever.